Unless someone tells you their gender, you literally have no way of telling.
One of the worst parts is I was just really excited to get to date another lesbian. I want to stab all of you to death as many times as I can.
Hey guys, I'm Brad Polumbo, and welcome back to the Damage Control Podcast, where I tackle the controversial discussions of the day on all things related to LGBT issues and try to reclaim this community from the insane leftists who've taken it over and from the far-right extremists who are bringing about some serious backlash. My guest today is gay journalist Billy Binion, and we talk about his experiences with the left-wing LGBT community and how he sees the state of affairs on the right these days. Then, as always, I react to some unhinged LGBT TikToks. If you're new here, consider subscribing, liking, commenting, letting me know your thoughts on this episode. And with that, let's get into it. Billy, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So I followed your work for a long time. You cover criminal justice, you're a writer at Reason, you write about all sorts of things, but once in a while, you dip your toe into the cesspool that is the national conversation over LGBT issues. Have you always done that since you've been a journalist, or is that something you've more recently started to dip into?
Well, it's kind of just touch and go. It has to be something that really a story that I find particularly interesting. Because like you said, it's not really on my beat. I write about a lot of legal issues, government accountability, criminal justice type stuff. So it doesn't often intersect with the culture war. But every once in a while, there's a culture war story that pertains to LGBT issues where I'm like, okay, I have something to say about this.
Yeah, so folks will remember if they're loyal listeners, and if you're not a loyal listener, then you're fake. But that a few weeks ago, I cited your story about Mathew Sheppard. So for folks that weren't tuning in, basically Biden honored the anniversary of the death of Mathew Sheppard, who at the time, decades ago, was considered to be killed in an anti-gay hate crime. But there's been a book and a lot of investigative research that's cast doubt on that narrative, and you wrote about how it was probably not actually an anti-gay hate crime. I'm curious, why wade into a story like that, and also what kind of reception do you get when you poke the bear on something like that?
So it's interesting, the actual the common thread between a lot of the LGBT stories I've covered, which isn't that many, but I would say out of all the ones I have covered, the commonality is pushing back on what I would call historical revisionism. So a tendency for people to kind of rewrite history when they wanted to suit a particular narrative. I would say the Mathew Sheppard case is a pretty glaring example of that. And I think the reason why I care about covering those issues is because I'm a little older than you, but I grew up, the Mathew Sheppard case, for example, it happened, I think, in 98. So when I went into high school and college, it was kind of like the case that was cited and among LGBT people for this sort of narrative that you could be next. You know what I mean? Like it is violent and scary to be gay. And I am not an idiot. I don't think that homophobia is eradicated. And a lot of people like to remind me about that when I push back on some of these narratives. But I'm not saying that. Obviously, homophobia exists, racism exists, and it will exist for as long as humans exist, because humans are not perfect, and discrimination is still a thing for sure. But I think no matter how noble your narrative is, it needs to be based in reality, and that you actually really undermine your movement when you have to rewrite history to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. So, I mean, I think the big picture thing is I look back on those times in high school and college where people were talking about Mathew Sheppard and were saying oh my gosh, you should be really afraid. Gay people have a reason to be afraid. And like I said, homophobia is real, but that crime, brutal and awful as it was not about his identity. And I don't think we should be using it to fearmonger among young gay people that, that they need to be looking over their shoulder.
Yeah, well, and also, even if it was, things have changed in many ways,
right,
largely for the better. But I guess what I'm curious about is you are on the libertarian side of the political spectrum, right? You work at Reason Magazine, a libertarian news website. What has your experience been? Because you still live in D.C., right?
I actually live in Texas.
Oh, but did you live in D.C.?
I did.
Okay, all right. So I lived in D.C., and I was, let's say, not so popular in the
Okay.
DC gay community, which is probably the most hyper politicized of all like urban gay communities, because it is so many of them work in politics. So I had a really hard time. I've talked about this before, and I was a little bit more of a bomb thrower than you, for sure, on these issues, especially a couple of years ago before I chilled out a little bit. But what has your experience been like? Like, has it been hard when I don't know, when you were dating, or if you're dating now, like, or at least when you were in DC, especially, did you encounter people who realized you weren't a liberal, you weren't progressive, and was that ever an issue for you?
Yeah, it's funny. I still have this like very vivid memory of this. I kind of what encapsulates dating in DC for me. I went on a date with someone, and we met at a coffee shop. I got some tea, and then we just hit the ground running with him, having like read a bunch of my articles and citing actual like lines I wrote, and just basically came on the day looking for a fight. And like, if anyone wants to know what dating in DC is like, I mean, obviously that's not everyone is going to do that, but like you said, it is this hyper political place where like I wasn't even surprised he did that. I was just like, okay, that's not why I came on this. I mean, like, you and I know, working in political media, we argue for a living, so like that's not what I was looking to do, and definitely did not follow up for a second date. But I mean, yeah, there are people. I remember there was another time I was in a gay bar, where someone's like, "Oh, like you work for that really conservative magazine." It's like, actually, it's not. You don't know what you're talking about. But like, I mean, I guess in the DC Overton window, libertarian probably qualifies as like far right in people's right, which isn't true, but it's just a different. People are operating with a different frame of mind there.
Yeah, they definitely are, and it's interesting because Reason was like pro-gay rights decades before Democrats were, but none of that really matters because Reason is coded as center-right for whether you would describe it as that or not. It's how it's perceived.
Right. It's kind of like in that Time magazine profile where they mentioned the Cato Institute, and they like made some swipe at them for being anti-drug liberalization and gay marriage. And I was like, are you joking? I mean, did you not like Google this before you published it?
Progressives have a very hard time parsing the distinctions on the right, seeing the shades of gray on the right, like the spectrum. They kind of, I mean, for example, I haven't called myself a conservative in many years. I think I did when I kind of dipped my toe into politics. I was like, because where I lived in Massachusetts, basically anybody who wasn't liberal was considered conservative. Right. And so as I kind of came to understand more what that label entailed, I was never socially conservative, so I haven't used that label in many, many years. But people will still constantly describe me as conservative. I will never describe myself as that, but people will constantly say, oh, he's a gay conservative. I would never describe myself like that, but they do, at least not anymore. But they do, and it's simply because that's kind of come to mean not liberal, basically. And so within the very pockets of progressive spaces, at least. So I found an incredibly hostile reception among the DC gay community. I mean, I joined when I moved there. I was such a naive little kid. I was like, I want to make friends with other gay people, and maybe I'll meet people, and maybe that's how I'll date. Because I never really liked the apps, even though I actually ended up meeting my now long-term boyfriend on one of the apps. But
oh, good for you.
Yeah. So
modern love.
I know, right? But so it was like 1 out of 1,000 terrible dates that emerged from those, though. So I was essentially like excommunicated from this gay men's soccer club because I had written in the Examiner, where I worked at the time, that I was not on board with kids medically transitioning, right? Especially taking puberty blockers and the hormone replacement therapy and going down that pipeline before I think the age of consent is where I've always felt comfortable. It's like if you're 16 or 17 and you own your body fully under the law, you should be able to do whatever you want. So I've always kind of had a moderate stance on trans issues. It's funny, I get attacked as transphobic from the left and like woke pro-trans from the right all the time.
Right.
But so I was excommunicated from this team because they said that my presence on the team made hypothetical future transgender members of the club, there were none,
feel unsafe,
physically unsafe.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
were they Googling your portfolio, or like, how did this come about?
I think a few members of the club were DC gays. I think one of them even worked for Medium Matters. And so as soon as that happened, I was like, all right, this was never meant to last. Right.
Have you had anything that rivals that back in your time in DC or in journalism, right? Because when people hear you're a gay journalist, I don't know about you, but they assume you're a lib, right? They assume you're a hardcore lib.
Well, I think one of the other things, so apart from the gay thing, I write about a topic that resonates, I think, more with left-leaning people. So when people find that I have, like, I guess, certain conservative proclivities, people just kind of use it to dismiss you, which I think is a mistake, because it implies that everyone thinks in a very binary black and white way. And I just don't think the world works like that. I think a lot of online internet personalities work like that. But I think, if you, like, the average person who might not be super online, especially today, I think is probably more open to being like, okay, like, you can think multiple different things at one time. But that doesn't have a lot of currency on something like Twitter, where you're supposed to just kind of be as extreme as possible,
Yeah, Twitter's like a drug I can't quit, honestly. But I think it's such a toxic and shitty place. I also think of all the places, like, Twitter, Brad, is probably the least appealing version of me that's present anywhere online. Like, and I think that's probably true for everyone. Like, if I, for example, a good example is, if I'm meeting somebody, like, or when I was meeting my boyfriend's parents or something, and he told them what I did and they wanted to, like, see some of it or whatever, the worst thing I could hear was, oh, they're going to look at your Twitter. I'm like, if I heard, like, oh, they read your articles, or, oh, they watch your videos on YouTube or something, I'm like, all right, I feel like that gives a good account of me. But, like, Twitter, it's just something, it brings out the worst. It condenses you. It makes, like, gives you this incentive to just nitpick people, to dunk on people for clout, to be devoid of nuance. And so I've really liked different formats. And so I find myself using Twitter less and less, but also I'm torn on it because I met so many interesting people over the years, like you, from Twitter.
Yeah, that actually is one of the things that I find to be, like, the great tragedy of kind of Twitter losing relevance. I mean, people can debate how they feel about Elon Musk. I'm not commenting on that. I'm more so just saying, like, obviously a lot of people have quit because they do feel a certain type of way about him. And I feel sad about it for that exact thing that you just said, because Twitter has always been toxic, but, like, it is the one social media platform that I felt like you could cultivate an actual community. Like, I don't use Facebook anymore. Instagram is really just for people who I already know. I'm a little more private on there. And then, I mean, I've done a little bit on TikTok, The Reason, but that's not a place where you cultivate a community either. Whereas, like, Twitter, I've met some super interesting people across the political spectrum. I used to find really good story ideas there. And so, yeah, I don't know. But to your point about people finding it, I don't give out my last name when I'm dating until, like, we're at, like, the third or fourth date. And it's for that exact reason, because I don't want people to find me.
So I have a question. Like, do you put that you're a libertarian in your dating bios or anything?
No.
Okay.
But I am not, if someone were to ask me where I work, I'm not going to, like, be embarrassed or, like, beat around the bush. Because that's part of who I am, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I went back and forth on this. Like, for a while I would take it out, and then it would be an issue after, like, a first or second date. And then, so I started just leading with it, which probably scared some people off who might have been okay with it if it was, like, slowly a toe dip into water. But I don't know. I feel like there's merits to either approach, but I also I wouldn't really want to date somebody who would hear that somebody works at a right-leaning place or has different political views and instantly want nothing to do with them. Like, clearly we're probably not going to work out if that's the case for you. But also, some people are just apolitical and and are kind of put off by anybody having really strong political views. So that's an interesting thread to draw on the gay community. It's interesting to me because the gay community is not politically monolithic, but it feels that way sometimes to me.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's certainly true. And I have had people who have found me on the internet before we've even met, and then who, like, block me or whatever. And it's like, okay. I mean, but like you said, if that's how you react to someone who just has, like, a mix, because, like, neither one of us are culturally all that conservative. We're both, like, I mean, at least not by the definition, just a few decades ago. I mean, a few decades ago, you and I would have probably been considered, like, socially flamingly liberal, so it's just like the Overton window moves so quickly. And if I'm too extreme for you, then like, okay, bye. Like that's like, to me, a level of closed-mindedness is just kind of silly.
Do you follow the LGBT media at all? Because I don't know. Like I subscribe to a few of the trashy LGBT websites, the Queer Tea, the LGBTQ Nation, the Advocate, and that used to apparently be an important thing, like gay media, and it is completely irrelevant now. And what they do publish is so like hyper partisan, toxic, and low brow. I think I wish there were more platforms, for example, like actual debates or interesting conversations focused on gay or LGBT issues, but I really don't think there are. I think there's a hard left silo, and then there's like a little pocket of gay Republicans or people who are in their own little silo over here, and there's not a lot of actual thoughtful exchange between the two, at least in my experience.
Yeah, whenever I see one of the like gay media things pop up, honestly, it's usually for like, we are highlighting how this person has problematic views about gay people or something like that. Like someone said something, and we all need to know that we can never engage with this person again. I know that's not all they do, but that's the kind of stuff I see, and I would agree. It's like, it's not doing anything useful. I mean,
so what are some things with the state of the LGBT movement where, as somebody with not all hard left views, right, where you find yourself feeling adrift or not in lockstep with them?
I mean, I will say this: when do you remember? It's almost a year ago now, which is insane. I feel like ever since COVID, time like doesn't make sense to me. But it was last February that the New York Times had like several hundred writers come out in response, condemning their coverage of transgender people.
Yes, of their debate or their coverage of the trans medical issues,
right?
Which is funny, and it had only been like a little bit skeptical of the medicine. They were still very pro-trans. They just had included a little bit of criticism or skepticism, and they freaked out.
Well, one of the main subjects of their ire was this very well-reported magazine piece by a woman named Emily Bazelon.
Yes.
Who, I mean, if you know her reporting, is certainly no right-leaning person. She writes a lot about abortion. And she wrote this very fair, like 11,000 some word piece about the disagreements and the fractures in the medical community about how to help people transition, what the code of conduct should be. And many of the doctors she interviewed are transgender themselves. And so I was like 980 contributors and staffers who came out and was like, we reject Emily Bazelon's reporting, I guess, because she like said there was room for nuance. And like, that's when you just totally lost me. And I wrote a couple of things about it in defense of her and people who are doing reporting like her, because like the entire point of this industry, especially at a place like the New York Times, which is supposed to be like the gold standard, and they do a lot of amazing work. But the entire point of this industry is to like interrogate the gray areas, but it just seems like really ridiculous to say like in journalism, you're no longer allowed to ask questions. That's the entire point, so I mean, to me, if that intellectual curiosity is dead, I think that's very dark.
I also find a lot of it kind of hysterical in the sense, in the actual, not in the funny sense of the word, but in the actual hysteria sense.
Like it's panic induced.
Yes, exactly. And so, for example, when they say like the New York Times coverage puts trans lives in danger, is the kind of mantra you'll hear repeated over and over again, even though they never bother to explain how that's actually remotely true. But the other thing is like the Human Rights Campaign declaring a first of its kind national state of emergency for LGBT rights in the year of our Lord 2023. It's like when they're just so worked up all the time and they seem so disconnected from reality, I often feel like I'm living and existing in a different universe than the alphabet people.
Well, and I think that actually is a great way to describe why I do think it's important to push back on like those Mathew Sheppard-esque stories, because they are used to further this narrative that like you and I are living in a time that's really hostile. And actually, I mean, if there were a great time to be born, being a part of this community, it would be now. I mean, it's never been better to be gay than it is now. Like I said, I'm not saying that means discrimination doesn't exist. It will always exist, but it is detached from reality to say that, it's really hard to be us right now, because that's just not true.
I mean, you're absolutely right. You could argue a little bit that maybe things have backslid a bit in the last couple of years. But if you were going to pick a year to exist as a gay person in America, you'd pick 2019 or 2018 or 2020 or maybe 2023. You wouldn't pick any other time, right? Like
even 50 years ago, like it's been rapid change for the better. And so when places like the Human Rights Campaign say that, I mean, they obviously have a vested interest in making people feel unsafe, which is perverse.
Yeah, absolutely. But what we kind of punch in both directions on this show. So I'm often talking about kind of the woke left, right? And I call them the alphabet people, basically the crazy part of the LGBT community. Because it's not all trans people. It's not all gay people. It's not all bisexual people, lesbian people. It's not even, but there's that segment of them, the kind that find themselves on libs of TikTok, of repeat offenders, right? But I also have witnessed what I think is kind of a backsliding on the right, in that when I was coming to, and I'm a few years younger than you, so I'm curious if you resonate with this as well, but like when I started working in conservative media after graduating college in 2018, 2019, I basically never encountered discomfort with my sexuality in like among peers, or never really heard people be homophobic. It's like gay rights was never brought up. It like wasn't a hot topic. It just felt settled after Obergefell, and people had kind of moved on. And sometimes we would debate like trans sports and stuff, but we basically never debated anything actually about gay people. With a few minor exceptions, like the cake baker example, which I always had a more libertarian position on anyway. And so I felt comfortable in a way that journalists or gay people from a decade or 2 decades before would never have felt comfortable working in conservative media. I will say, though, I'm independent now, or I have my own organization, right? I'm not in a right-leaning media institution anymore. I wonder if I'd still feel the same way, because I do think we've seen kind of a pendulum swing in the other direction. So I'm curious, that's what I've seen. How do you feel the conversation has shifted over the last couple of years on the right over these issues?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting question. I wouldn't say that I've, experienced much of that at Reason.
Well,
specifically because
Reason's always
right, and it's like people place us on the right, but like I actually wouldn't even agree with that. I feel like that's just kind of like when people think in this like binary way, you have to put us somewhere. But I mean, I think about it more in the terms of like that quadrant. It's always like where do you? I think that's a more accurate way to classify people politically. But I do think, I mean, I see what you're saying, like with like Ron DeSantis was leaning really hard into the he had that campaign video that was painting Donald Trump as like horrifyingly pro-gay,
but I will especially
right. But I will say, and so I see where you're coming from, and I think that kind of it's another form of hysteria, and it's just as ridiculous. But I will say that it's not working. Like Ron DeSantis' presidential campaign has been embarrassing. He was seen as like the golden boy of Florida, and then he tried to scale his culture war approach nationally, and everyone's like, no thanks. I mean, like he is essentially getting no traction and catching up to Donald Trump in the polls. I mean, I don't think that necessarily says anything good either, but I think that people are on the right are trying to lean really hard into the culture war as a platform, and it's not a platform because people care about how to feed their family. They don't care as much about drag queen story hours people on Twitter do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think there's some aspects of it people do care about. I think I've encountered a lot of people who genuinely do care about women's fairness in women's sports.
I think that's 1,000%
about transitioning minors. That's one that people do really care about.
I agree with you, and I agree that I don't even consider that as much part of the culture war though, because it is like a pressing policy issue that people are talking about. And I will also say that while it seems controversial on Twitter to say, like, maybe people born biologically male shouldn't be up against, biological females in soccer or swimming, that does seem like a controversial thing to say on Twitter. I don't think it's controversial if you would, like, stop people on the street.
No, it's
you know what I mean?
not
I
at
think,
all.
right. I even think, like, your mainstream, like, normie Democrat would be like, oh yeah, that's probably a little unfair,
They would. But these echo chambers, they really do distort our view of these issues on the left and on the right. Because somebody like the hardcore right-wing culture warriors, they know that the culture war works among a select base, the Daily Wire subscriber viewership. And I'm not even saying there's anything wrong with that, but they sometimes extrapolate that to the entire public, or to the right at large, or everybody who votes Republican and cares about these issues, these exact issues, and these exact feelings about it. And it's really not true. A lot of people are disengaged from those issues. But it's an interesting place where things are going to go. And I increasingly feel like I'm in my own little island yelling into the void about these things. And there's not a lot of people kind of charting a middle path, because I just feel totally detached from the left alphabet people. But I also I find the way the right talks about trans people to be cruel at times.
For sure.
I find the debate over trans issues often devoid of nuance, when I think some of the issues are very nuanced and a lot of them are new and we don't know that much about them. But then I find that the debate stifled, because people on the left will try to cancel J.K. Rowling, who has pretty milquetoast centrist views on those questions, if you actually look at what she's actually said. So I honestly avoided launching this show for a while, because I used to early in my career write and talk about LGBT issues. Then I stopped and really focused on other things for years. And then I kind of relaunched this show about 6 months ago, and it's been doing very well. So I'm sticking with it because people want to hear about these topics. But I felt like I almost didn't want to even get back into them because they're so toxic.
They are so toxic. There's something unique about the culture war that brings out everyone's worst qualities, it seems. I guess it's because we all partake in the culture, and a lot of culture war critiques do kind of get at sometimes the heart of who a person is. So yeah, kudos to you, because it's like you said, I do wade in occasionally, but not nearly as much as you.
No, and especially on platforms like YouTube. In print journalism, it's a little more niche, the LGBT discussion. But in video and multimedia, it really is a dominant issue. And it is something that people constantly reward with their clicks. So you kind of, if you're competing in this marketplace for people's attention, you kind of have to go where it is. But there's just very few middle voices. It's like you either have hard right voices, you got the Matt Walshes of the world, or you've got the they, them who thinks biological sex is a construct. And I'm like, where is the voice representing the normal people in the world? And so in the gay community, in many everyday people who just are cool with gay rights, but aren't kind of nuts on these issues. I'll put it like this in a question to you. Do you think the state of the discourse on LGBT issues is getting better or worse? Because I think my estimation of it, but I'm curious for yours.
I think it's absolutely getting worse.
Yes.
It's absolutely getting worse. The trans parts especially just really fires people up. And you and I have both said, there are reasons, very legitimate reasons, to care about fairness in women's sports and making sure that children aren't chemically castrated before they can make an informed decision. But yeah, I mean, it is such a toxic conversation on both sides, because there is a resistance to any sort of nuance. And if you try to inject nuance, then you either want to kill trans people or are a deviant.
Right.
So,
but are you? I'm curious. Do you sense any of the tension between the gay issues and the trans issues? So, I for example, when I encounter the more extreme faces of trans activism, I'll see things like genital preferences are transphobic, right? Where I'm all right, so hold up. You're basically telling me being gay is problematic now.
Right.
And then the question of transitioning minors, it's sometimes I have many friends, I wasn't really like this, but I have many gay friends who were extremely effeminate or like to do girl things as kids, and now they're like, would I have been transitioned? Because I grew up to be just
Right.
fine with my gender. So do you sense that tension between those things? Because they don't want to acknowledge it on the left, but I do think it's there.
Oh, absolutely. Andrew Sullivan has, I know he's a controversial character, but he has written convincingly on this issue that essentially, we're transifying what is probably a lot of young gay boys and girls, or boys and girls that would grow up to be gay. I think it's kind of a scary prospect. I mean, I kind of was one of those kids too, to be honest. I loved dressing up in my sister's Snow White costume and wearing my mom's shoes. So the signs were there. I mean, my parents would never have been on board for a transition, and I'm glad not, because I also am comfortable in my sex and think I am male. I have never had a problem with that. But I mean, I think you're already seeing it with some of the voices who, come out and say, I made this choice before I could really be informed enough to make it biologically with, where my brain development was. And to some extent, there's no going back. And that's really scary to think that you could make a decision at 13, 14 that forever alters the trajectory of your life.
Yeah, I find it really hard that oftentimes they're making lifelong decisions about fertility at such a young age, because for I forget which, I think it's male to female. If they transition very early in puberty, they can never actually they will lose their fertility if they go all the way through it and never go through their original puberty. If they go on puberty blockers, then do cross-sex hormones, they will never actually be able to have biological children. And I'm just like, I still am not 100% sure in what I want to do with a family and children and in life. And it's like, imagine trying to make that choice at 12. I really can't. But yet, if you even,
Right,
if you even
I was
ask
watching
this
an interview
question-
with someone
Yeah.
recently, or there's there's someone who was being interviewed by a famous transgender commentator whose name I'm forgetting. Buck
Buck
I think is-
Angel, yeah.
Yes, okay. And so Buck Angel was interviewing someone who transitioned as a teen from male to female. And this person was saying there's a lot of regret. And this person was saying the exact same thing, that at 14, a doctor asked, well, do you want kids? And the answer was no at the time. But who at 14 knows if they want, I mean, you're still a child.
Yeah.
You can't picture having children. I mean, it really is insane. When I was 14, I wanted to be a musician. Dreams and goals change over the course of adolescence.
They do, and that's why a lot of that is scary for me. But I also have compassion for people with gender dysphoria, because it is a real thing, and it's not just
Absolutely a real thing.
the boogeyman that people make it out to be. And then I also think some people get way too pressed about how other people live their life.
Yeah.
I've started to see people on the right get mad when they see a picture of a dude in a dress, or and not even a trans, Harry Styles wearing a dress,
Right.
or they see a dude wearing makeup. I've had people, I'm wearing a little bit of makeup right now. I do it when I'm on camera. And I've had people get very mad that I'm wearing makeup. I'm like, all right, well, I have bright lights shining on my face, sweetie.
Right.
I don't want to look like
Right.
trash. And so I worry we're getting back to a little bit of this pearl clutchy,
Right.
I don't even know what the right word is, but regressive attitude,
Right.
because they feel like they've gone so far amok with the crazy gender stuff that now we need to go back to this really rigid gender roles that never really made any sense.
Right. And people who get upset about that sort of thing, I've seen it too. The makeup thing, especially, it's that's where my kind of libertarian ethos comes into my personal life, because I'm honestly just why do you care? It just has no impact on you at all. So yeah.
Yeah, completely.
100% agree.
All right, Billy. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I will put a link to your writing in the comments. People can check out more of your work. But thanks so much for coming on the podcast. And please do keep dipping your toe in on these issues, because we need all the hands in the fight that we can get.
Thanks for having me.
All right, guys. It's time for everybody's favorite part of the podcast, where I react to unhinged LGBT TikToks. Up first, do extreme trans activists wish death on people who disagree with them?
Yes, I do wish death on transphobic people because they wish death on me and have caused death to many, many, many of my brothers and sisters in the trans community. I want to stab all of you to death as many times as I can. I want to stab you in the throat and twist it like I'm carving a f***ing pumpkin. I want to shred you into tiny f***ing pieces. I want to tear your f***ing bones out from your goddamn body. I want to scoop your brains out with a f***ing spoon. I want to eat your f***ing flesh.
Well, them seems lovely. Seriously, can somebody tag the FBI in the comments to go make sure this person is okay and not going to hurt anybody? This is an extreme example, but unfortunately you do see a lot of trans activists who think it's okay to perpetuate violence against people who disagree with them. That's fundamentally flawed as a moral question, but is also some of the most counterproductive politics I've ever encountered. You don't convince people by reaching out with a closed fist. You convince them by reaching out with an open hand. And if voices like this continue to dominate the discourse on the extreme corners of trans activism, you can expect people to become more resistant, not more accepting, because scare tactics, intimidation, and threatening people don't exactly make them like you more. But other than that, you're doing great, sweetie. Up next, this one is a doozy.
A reminder that unless someone tells you their gender, you literally have no way of telling. And yes, that includes your own children. I don't care how young they are.
So this kind of thing is just so silly to me. I mean, we do have a way of telling because like 99.9% of people, their birth sex, their biological sex, which we can almost always tell, is exactly how they identify and what gender they are. In no other situation where you had almost 100% correlation with something would people seriously argue it is wrong to assume something because of a correlation like that. And look, if you do encounter a person with gender dysphoria who identifies as a different gender, I do think you should be polite to them and either refer to them how they would like to be referred, or at least try to avoid purposefully referring to them in ways that make them uncomfortable. But don't tell us that we have to stop engaging in perfectly normal and rational behavior in the name of tolerance just to account for extreme minority exceptions and examples. You're just going to confuse people and make them more hostile to your community. Up next, this trans woman is very upset that lesbians won't date her.
Hi, if you are a cis lesbian or a lesbian who says that they won't date pre-op trans women, I need you to listen to this. So I was dating someone the last couple of weeks. It doesn't look like that's going to continue. Obviously, that sucked. One of the worst parts is I was just really excited to get to date another lesbian. I've been dating actively and going on plenty of dates for 2.5 years since I came out. This is the first lesbian that has actually dated me. A vast majority of the people that are interested in me are bisexual or pansexual and do not have experience with women. I end up feeling like I am the halfway point between men and exploring women. When I swipe right on people who say that they're lesbians, I assume that they're probably not into me. Do you know how much that sucks? This is what the discourse causes in real life.
Honey, it's not the discourse that is preventing lesbians from not wanting to date you. It's the fact that lesbians, by definition, aren't attracted to male genitalia or to biological males more generally. That's kind of inherent to the whole lesbian thing. And that's fine. That's the way they are. It's the way they are inherently oriented. And it's not something that you get to rewrite or rechange or decide is problematic in the name of your own movement. Of course, I want you to find somebody and be happy, and there are plenty of people out in the world who will want to date you exactly how you are as a trans woman. But yes, those people are going to tend to be bisexual because that makes the most sense. It's weird that you would be so hung up on dating a lesbian as opposed to a bisexual person anyway. I mean, why? And it's this kind of thing that makes people who are same-sex attracted, be they gay or lesbian, feel like extreme trans activism is a threat to our own rights and our own acceptance. It is okay to be only attracted to members of your own sex, which does not include trans members of that group. It doesn't make you problematic. It doesn't make you a bigot. It makes you gay or lesbian, and that is okay. Can we also just stop with this weird trend of trying to bully people into dating you? Like, it's not cute, and it's giving Me Too vibes. All right, guys, that's about as much LGBT TikTok as I can handle in one day without getting nauseous. And I don't really want to throw up my lunch on you. I don't think that'd be cute for my YouTube viewers to witness. All right, guys, thanks so much for joining us. Check out the links in the description to see more of Billy's work. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider dropping a like, subscribing to the community, or commenting and letting me know what you thought. And with that, I'll see you all in my next video. But if you somehow still want more Brad and you want more damage control content, you can keep watching and check out my interviews with Blair White and Buck Angel next.